Okay, I see the button.
We are recording. Hi, everybody. This is Katelyn Creasel, one of your hosts of SustainaFi, the Sustainable Finance Podcast. And I am here with my colleague, Thom, my co-host, one of the other hosts of SustainaFi. So Thom, say hello.
Hi. Nice to see you all, or be seen, I guess.
Yes. And we are, well, obviously we're recording via Zoom this evening, which is different from our traditional format where we're normally in my studio / dining room. As a result of the pandemic, we've both faced some delays in our ability to record. And that's why you haven't seen us for a month, and also why we're recording remotely, as my daughter was exposed to the coronavirus last week. So we are in quarantine and making the best of it, just like everyone else out there. So you're joining us here in my kitchen this evening. So Thom, while we're on the subject, how are you and your family doing? You guys were quarantining earlier this month, right?
Right, and then my father-in-law got his results back, and they were negative. So, that seems to be we're fine. Everybody's fine. I mean, we're still obviously so. We're in Onondaga County, for those of you that don't know, and Onondaga County cases are rising significantly, like they are across the country. And so we are, we're taking it. We're being cautious, but yeah, this whole thing is really difficult. I mean, I'm sure it's really difficult, more difficult for some folks than others, more difficult. We're in very lucky in a lot of ways, but it is just hard and draining. And so for everybody out there who's seeing this,
we're there with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's been, I'm a single mom, as you know, Thom, and I have 2 daughters, and only one really technically had to quarantine, but it seemed important that since we'd already spent the whole week together and she'd been exposed 5 days earlier, that if she were going to be stuck in the house, then we should be too. Because what's the difference? If she had it, then we would have gotten it by then. So all 3 of us are here, and our community has been so generous. My parents in particular are very helpful for us, and in that way I feel very lucky and very blessed. And but also neighbors have been bringing us gifts and sending us letters. A couple of folks brought me some wine, so I'll take that. And whatever one individual might need or one family might need, to have your community be able to show up for you like that. It might get more difficult as fewer and fewer people are really able to leave their homes. So here's to hoping we get a shot that everyone can take, or the what's it called?
Vaccine.
There it is. So that we can all safely leave our homes and be together again. Yeah. But in the meantime, we're here. Thom, you and I are here together, and so we can talk about sustainable finance and distract ourselves a little bit with the subject that we're mutually obsessed with. So
yeah. I mean, all of this stuff, right? There's a huge piece of dealing with this that relates to finance. I mean, finance relates to everything, right? Because nothing, like we said this on the first show, and I'll say it again, and nothing happens without finance, down to the vaccine, right? Like being produced and all of that. But I think from a sustainable finance perspective, and something that we think about a lot, is like, how do we create, thriving communities that can support one another in times of great need? I think there's all kinds of connections to sustainable finance relating to, this, like people being worth more than dollars, and putting people over profits. And, it's a great example, like what you mentioned about your family and your neighborhood and everybody coming together, right? Like that's an example of people doing things without being paid, without making money off of them, because they care about other people, and they care about how, they care about the welfare of others.
Right.
And that is, that's part of sustainable finance, right? That's almost, in a certain sense, that's the essence of sustainable finance. It's actually figuring out how do we prioritize the needs of humans over profit. So I think this is it's a great time to be talking about this and trying to think about how do we make that world a reality, right? Because to be honest, our world is not built for that right now. Our world is built to maximize profits. That's the primary motivation of most companies. And so how do we change that?
And that's a great segue, Tom, because you and I, we don't have as much of a, not that we normally script what we say, but we normally really organize and we plot out kind of the arc of what we're going to talk about. And tonight we didn't really do that. We are freewheeling it a little bit, mostly because our esteemed colleague, Megan, wasn't able to join us, so she couldn't force us into being organized as we otherwise would have. Right. So we miss you, Megan. We wish you could be here with us, but since you're not here, we're going, when the cat is the way, the mice will play. So,
the disorganized mice will play.
Exactly. So our plan this evening is to talk a little bit about the election and some of the things that we'd like to see happen, the types of things we'd like to see come out of the Biden administration, or perhaps just out of Congress in general. Like we have an understanding, and a lot of our listeners might as well, about the failings of sustainable finance, or the failings of traditional finance, and how sustainable finance can be the solution. And so we oftentimes can get stuck in all the things that are wrong, and we talk about those things a lot. So this is an opportunity to be a little bit more upbeat and positive. What are some solutions? What are some things we would just like to see if we could conjure up anything to make the world a better place? The crux of sustainable finance is, how does it actually do what you said? How can we build better communities? How can sustainable finance usher in an era where profits are not mutually exclusive with the happiness and well-being and welfare of people, of our communities, of ourselves and our families? So I'll let you go first.
All right. Well, I actually have something to say, which is good.
Oh, good.
I've been reading this book called The Deficit Myth, which I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's by an advocate of MMT, which stands for, here's another acronym, Modern Monetary Theory, Stephanie Kelton. And she's it's written and read by her. For those of you that don't know, I almost exclusively listen to things like podcasts, a lot of podcasts, as well as books, audiobooks. And so it's really, she's got a lot of really insightful and interesting things to say. And obviously, I don't need to go into too much detail about MMT or anything like that. What I really want to talk about is one of the proposals that's coming out of MMT, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts about this, Katelyn, is a thing called a federal job guarantee. So, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is, and I don't necessarily think this is something that could be done in a first administration for Biden, mostly because we're not taking, the Democrats are not taking Congress, and even the Democrats are not fans necessarily of MMT and what it espouses. But this idea of it goes back to what we were just talking about all of this work that people do to take care of one another that is not paid. And so how do we figure out a way to monetize that, to put money in the pockets of people who traditionally have not been paid for all this great work that they do, right? So, raising kids, caring for the elderly, maybe even paying more for some jobs that are in the care industry, right? And so this idea is basically, it's put simply, it's the federal government guarantees that anybody who wants to work will have a job at base wage. And what that does is it puts a minimum, it basically replaces a minimum wage, right? Because it says hey, if you can't get a job making a decent wage somewhere else, you can always go to the government for a job. And these jobs would be in care-focused industries, putting people to work, caring for one another in their communities. And so obviously this is a huge federal government jobs program, would probably cost a lot of money. Folks who are worried about the deficit and I don't know if you got it from the title of the book, but she's not worried about deficits. Would, you know, disagree with that idea a lot, but I'm just interested in your thoughts about, like, what do you think about that? Like, what do you think about, like, a federal job guarantee where folks, you know, can get paid for the work they're already doing in their communities, to support and care for one another?
Well, I mean, on the nose of it, on the face of it, who wouldn't love just a
Yeah.
guaranteed job for everyone? So I think right off the bat, there is a lot to be said that's good about it. And what I've found is that a lot of times where you see pushback on public policy is when a certain individual with a certain frame of mind might think that it's a handout, right? That
Yeah.
they don't want to see someone just sitting at home watching Netflix, not working,
Right.
getting
Right.
paid to do that, because they're working really hard and
Yeah.
they're working extremely hard for their money, and that has an undertone of it that might bother a lot of people, and does
Yeah.
bother a lot of people, the thought of that. So if there was a guaranteed job, then that seems to me like it would jive really well with a lot of the people that push back on a lot of the social benefits and a lot of the welfare that we could probably agree there isn't quite enough of. And
Yeah.
during a pandemic like this, where you've got a lot of problems, right, that might solve.
Yeah.
Like off the top of my head, a lot of people are unemployed,
Mhm.
and having groups of people together is really dangerous.
Mhm.
So if you had a program where individuals could be taking care of individuals that need it, and for example, if someone was coming and helping me with my daughters, well, I could do my job. That would be phenomenal. I
Mhm.
can't put them in a daycare.
Mhm.
If you're elderly or sick, you can't be in a nursing home anymore. So who's going to take care of you? So
Mhm.
I think that you're solving I mean, it's really sustainable finance, right? You've got the element that makes it where we're really helping people and there's this positive impact and a community good, but
Mhm.
it's also got this economic argument. We've seen tremendous economic activity as a result of the aid package that came out earlier this year with the CARES Act. Like
Mhm.
that was a really effective. People didn't. Most people kept looking for jobs. Most people kept working, but they took that money and they spent it on the things that they needed, which kept the economy going. I
Mhm.
just saw an article yesterday that Walmart, not a company that necessarily meets a lot of sustainable financial criteria, but that they're seeing their profits plummet because people don't have enough money to spend. So
Mhm.
if you want to support the economy and you want your shares of your position in Walmart to increase in value, then give people the opportunity to work and earn money. And I don't see what there would be. I mean, is there what do you think the pushback would be from people that would be opposed to a program like that?
Well, so I mean, it's a huge expenditure on the federal budget, right? So, you know, I mean, if anybody that wants to can walk in and say, you know, I want a job, and then get a job, and you'd have to have it'd be difficult to implement in the sense that you'd have to have lots of jobs with lots of different levels, you know, for lots of different types of people. But you know, one of the things that I think is overlooked in that, you know, disagreement with the policy is that there are already lots of ways in which our existing welfare system, whether it be through Social Security disability, or whether it be, you know, direct, like, you know, your standard TANF, you know, temporary assistance for needy families, welfare, you know, any of those things, like there are many instances in which there are folks on those programs that would gladly work,
Yes.
give the opportunity to get a job that they could attain. And so to like have all that unused labor, like just sitting in our economy, I mean, I feel like, you know, you talk about the unemployment rate, you know, I mean, and the unemployment rate we see, right, that cuts off a whole bunch of people that have stopped looking for jobs, right? And so those folks are already, in many cases, those folks are already collecting a check from the government. Except in this instance, they would be like producing stuff into the economy in addition, right? So they're drawing a check from the government, but they're actually they're increasing productive capacity, right?
Yeah.
Increasing productive capacity in jobs that are not usually paid very well. They're like you know, nursing care. You know, frankly, a lot of the folks that I see in financial counseling either work in those industries that are sort of like really, really important and really, really needed by people, and yet pay so little and are like just disdained by, like, for some reason, like, you know, nursing assistants are like looked at as like the bottom rung, and yet they're doing work that is so important to care for people that need it. And there's not enough of them. Like, I have clients on the other side who would love to have some in-home care, who could live on their own if they had a little bit of help at home.
Right.
And I've been thinking about this a lot in particular because I have a particular client that I've been thinking about, like that, like the trials and tribulations of her life on a daily basis, not to mention during quarantine, right? Like, she can't go anywhere, and she like can barely move around her house, and she has no in-home help, and she has no way to get it and no way to pay for it.
Go ahead.
We lost internet because of my ongoing internet problems. But, you know, I was just saying that I'm particularly thinking about this because I have a client who, you know, with a little bit of help could definitely stay in her home, but could definitely not afford it. You know, living on 2 small pensions and Social Security disability, you know, like, I guess bottom line, like, I don't know any other company or industry that's other than the federal government, right? That's going to pay for these things to get done, that can do these things profitably. And so, but yet, like, there's all this unused capacity, and there's all these people that need it. And, you know, how do you do that without, so to answer your question, right? What are people going to argue about? I mean, they're going to say, well, that's a bunch of money that the government, you know, is going to have to tax. Which, you know, putting aside MMT, like, they would say, no, they don't need to tax, you know, they can print the money and they can do it. And as long as inflation doesn't go up, you know, then that's not a problem. But putting that aside, that would be I think that would be the comeback is, you know, like, the government can't afford it. The government can't afford to do any of those things.
Well, I think that we will see a transition in, I mean, we're already seeing it. People are talking about universal basic income in a way that they never have before. Like, it was always very esoteric, very meta, very like, well, like Finland tried it or Sweden tried it, but it didn't really work, and it definitely wouldn't work
And
here.
that's Finland. So.
Right. What does the Netherlands know about any of this? But we're hearing conversations like that come up. So I think that, again, like, I think a pushback that we might get on a universal basic income is I worked really hard. You're just going to give my hard-earned money to someone else that didn't work hard.
Right.
If one of the things that we talked about, and actually we were preparing for an episode we haven't yet recorded, related to retirement. And I had listened to an episode of the podcast, which I don't remember what it was, but I will put it in the link once we post it on YouTube.
Is it the one that Patrick told you about?
Yeah.
So that was an Ezra Klein. That was an Ezra Klein episode.
Okay.
I did listen. He got it to me, and I listened to it.
Okay, great.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So we'll put that in there for everyone.
Yeah,
and no one knows who Patrick is, but it's fine. See, this is what happens when Megan isn't here.
I know.
But I listened to this episode, and I thought it was so interesting because I never really thought about it, how the American experience of living, how we just get through our day, how everything related to the conversations that we have with people waiting to cross the street, or standing in a coffee shop, or the people that we interact with when we're visiting the doctor. Everything is centered around our job. So in other countries, it's considered extremely rude to ask, what do you do for work? People will be like, why? That's none of your business. Like, that's just my job. It has nothing to do with me. Like, they would never ask that. And here, everything, it's the first or second question you ask after learning someone's name. And then all of our benefits, our ability to retire, Social Security income, access to a 401k, all of your benefits. And if you don't have a job, you don't have any of that infrastructure. And so there are a lot of people in the United States that simply cannot work, you know, for one reason or another. Whatever struggles or difficulties they have, whatever their life has brought to them. If maybe they're taking care of an elderly parent and they just can't get a job. This theory that you're mentioning, that you're bringing up, would really solve a lot of those problems. So I think that as we transition into 2021 and into this next administration, there will always be hurdles and there will always be costs to programs. But the question that sustainable finance asks is, aside from the financial cost, what are the what are the other costs, or is it externalities? Like, what are how does it impact the community? How does it impact the environment? How does it impact you as a person and your family? And it would elevate a lot of people that historically have had difficulty getting jobs, and compensate people that are doing a job already that they can't get paid for.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I agree. I think that's an interesting thing that we should definitely look at.
Yeah, and I'd like to at some point do like a show about MMT and think about that. I mean, it's something I'm just learning about, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know that much about it other than this book and a couple of.
Well, when you're done reading the book, you can lend it to me, and then we can have an episode about it.
Yeah, that would be cool.
All right, so I'm going to toss out something completely different.
Nice. Do it. Throw it at me.
So this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. I talk about it all the time, but we've not really talked about it on one of our episodes yet. Mm-hmm. But it's just the first thing that comes to my mind. So if I don't talk about this, then nothing else will pop into my head.
Sure.
But fossil fuel divestment is something that I've been pretty obsessed with for quite a long time. And I'll give a little bit of a background. So fossil fuel divestment, it really started with college endowments and university endowments. And there were pushes from student groups.
And Katelyn, what are university endowments?
University endowment. You might have to help me actually answer this question. So it's like they're the pools of money that are gifted to schools that they've accumulated over all these decades that they've been around, that they use to fund scholarships or university programs. It's their savings account. It's what helps them flow. And they invest that money. Yep. Just like you and I might in our retirement accounts, in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and private placement type stuff. But most of it's in mutual funds that are pretty similar to the types of things that you and I might buy. It's a little bit different, but there's more in common than there's not. Yeah. And so students and an organization, 350.org, started pushing to divest these endowments of colleges and universities, first all around the country, and it expanded all around the world, to divest from fossil fuel companies. And the reason for that, the theory behind that was it started with divesting from apartheid in South Africa. And it was extremely effective because you're divesting from companies, you're putting financial pressure on them. And in the economy we have in the United States, companies are really susceptible to that pressure because we have capitalism. So if you're selling their stock, you're selling the shares of the stock that you own in those companies, you're divesting from them, and their share price is going to go down, and they don't like that. And there's all these different reasons why that's the case. Yeah. So this grew and it expanded, and religious institutions and spiritual institutions started doing it, and governments started doing it all around the world. And so in New York State, there is a very active campaign that I'm a part of, Divest New York. And we have a bill that's got dozens of co-sponsors in the state Senate and the state assembly. And it's the New York State Fossil Fuel Divestment Act. And so this is a policy that, should it be passed, would create inside of the New York State Pension Fund, one of the largest pension funds in the country, a investment policy statement prohibiting the investment in fossil fuel companies and removing slowly and responsibly over 5 years the fossil fuel companies that are already there. New York State Common Retirement Fund, the New York State pension that any government employee participates in, aside from New York City, or teachers. Those are the two that are separate. So not all government employees, but everyone else, you're in the New York State Common Retirement Fund. And if you're invested in that, you're really beholden to the decisions that are being made on your behalf by the New York State Comptroller. And so why would one divest? The arguments, there are two. One, that by divesting, the moral argument or ethical argument that we should not be investing in companies that are pillaging and destroying the planet that we live on. We kind of need this planet for later. Like, we can't go get a new one. Doesn't work that way. So we shouldn't be investing in them. And then subsequent to that, we certainly shouldn't be profiting off of them. And it would hurt these companies if we were to divest from them. And Chevron, in one of its shareholder reports, annual reports that it released within the last 2 or 3 years, listed fossil fuel divestment as one of its greatest risks to its company. So It's definitely working. Yeah. And then second to that, fossil fuel companies have historically underperformed. And while historical performance is not necessarily indicative of future results, the pattern that we've seen historically is very clear. And the New York State Pension Fund has lost, I can never remember exactly how much it is, but it's tens of millions of dollars. It might even be $1 billion. I can look it up while you're talking next and get an exact figure. But the performance of that fund is what allows people to be able to retire in New York State. Now, this is something interesting that I've understood but learned a little bit more about recently. If the common retirement fund underperforms, and which it has, because it's still invested $1 billion in Exxon alone, then it's not that now all those people won't get their pensions, they'll still get them. It's just that now the taxpayers of New York State will bail them out. Might be on the hook for it. Yeah, and that gets calculated every year. Every year, all of the municipalities that are responsible for the pensioners that work there, they get a calculation, an amount that they have to send based on how well or how poorly that performance was of that fund. So every year that it underperforms, taxpayers have to put in more. The difference. Yep. To make sure that the actuaries are okay with it. They think it'll be funded. Now, when you say underperformed, do you mean underperformed again, measured against what? Against like the S&P or like? Yeah. Yep. So if you compare, if one were to do a search of the 10-year performance of the major fossil fuel companies and compare it to the S&P, and then if you were to do another analysis, same search, but you compare those companies to a fossil fuel free index, you'll see that the performance is even stronger. So they would have been better off having been invested in fossil fuel free. Yes. If they had divested 10 years ago, the pension, well, ask me more questions and I'll search it up. No, I mean, I think this is, I think, well, so first of all, I mean, from going back to the point of our podcast, right, is like, so this is a great example of how, what we collectively do with our money when we choose to, look at what's good for the world first, and then make decisions about what we do with our money based on that. We often still wind up doing as well or better financially, right? So that's great. And then also, this divestment stuff, I think a lot of times when people say divestments, what they're saying is, it's sort of like this, like us against them, right? Like let's shut them down, kind of like let's shut down these big fossil fuel companies. And it's like, well, that may be one outcome, right? But another outcome could possibly be that those oil companies change their business and focus and throw all of that weight that they've built up in terms of capital into new industries that are better for the environment. And so that's even like, that's a huge multiplier effect, right? Because now we're saying, okay, you took your money out of here, and Chevron and others recognized, oh wow, you know what? This is pulling money out of our capital pool, and it's making it harder for us to do our job, to make more money. Wow, we should take notice of that, and maybe we want to like shuffle off this I can just see a Chevron executive being like, wow, solar's awesome. Well, why have I been doing this the whole time? So the thing that I think is really interesting about that, right, is that if you look into, there's some, and we should do some more research around this, and maybe this is something we want to do another show about, but like, if you look at the history of Exxon, like there was a time when Exxon was saying to its, this is in like the 1970s, was like actually heavily invested in R&D around alternative technology, alternative power production technologies. And what's R&D, Tom? Sorry, research and development. Research and development, right? Yeah, so they were like putting money into
figuring out these new technologies, and they were going to be an energy company, not a fossil fuel company.
We're seeing these companies start to make the exact transition that you're mentioning, and if they became big into research and development, into renewables, into different types of sustainable fuels, and you know, because we've got heating, we've got electricity, and we've got fuel to drive your car, and those are the three main things. And if they're continuing to do research on that more and more and more and more, we'll invest in your company. Like, you made a transition.
Right.
We didn't expect you to always be perfect.
Right.
I think, like, I mean, and this is purely conjecture, but my understanding of these companies is that they knew that the writing was on the wall, right? They knew that they couldn't burn everything that they had, but they wanted to burn as much as they possibly could to capitalize and economize the assets that they had. And so what
they made a conscious choice to take the to go the other, at least Exxon. It's clear in the documents that have been released.
And like Exxon knew, like, the hashtag, like we've seen. Well, I mean, you can search that up on Twitter and other places. Well, I did Google it, by the way. I was completely off. I was far, far lower. Guess how much more the pension would have had in 2018 if it had divested.
I love that you're doing your I have no idea, Katelyn. Tell me.
All right. 22 billion.
Wow.
Yes. 22 billion.
So that's the number. That's the amount of money by which the pension funds would be wealthier had they invested in fossil fuel free.
All they had done simply was to divest from those companies and create a fossil fuel free portfolio, and made no other different, and reallocated that money into the rest of the portfolio as it existed.
Oh, as it existed, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so just purchased more shares, sold shares of fossil fuels, and bought more shares of what they already owned.
Yes.
Wow. So not even like wouldn't even have required them to do any more thinking about their portfolio.
They had just done that alone.
Wow.
And this is, and I'll put the link to this in the subtext of this, and it's a report from the Corporate Knights. And it's entitled "Divestment Would Have Made New York Pension Fund $22 billion Richer." And just look at the performance year to date of fossil fuel companies and arrive at your own conclusion. How well have those companies done? And and we've seen, like, when you're thinking about the creation of a portfolio, when you're looking at the stock of a company, a great question that one might ask oneself when picking a company is, do I think that this company is going to be doing better or worse a year from now? And we've got a lot longer to live on the planet than just a year. Do we really think that these companies are where we want our money in 10, 20, 50, 100 years? And this pension fund's got to last. So there is momentum in New York State with the New York State Fossil Fuel Divestment Act. And we have a great coalition. Every other week we meet, and it's like 35, 40 people on these Zoom calls, and we're all working together, and we're working very collaboratively with officials at the state level to see if we can't get this done. And so we're very optimistic that we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah,
so I'd love to see more states look at their pension funds. I'd love for New York State to set that example. And then on this note, there's been pressure at the national level from the Department of Labor to make it so that 401ks, employer-sponsored retirement plans, could not do a fossil fuel-free portfolio. So there is a ruling that's proposed over the summer by the Trump administration to make it so you cannot include ESG in a 401k. And it was panned. They had no one, I think except one single solitary comment in favor of it. BlackRock, Fidelity, Vanguard, all the big players, and then all of the smaller socially responsible money managers that we work with at my firm, they all came out against it. It was very clear that this was ridiculous, because we know that socially responsible investments, and when you screen for environmental social governance in a portfolio, that historically those funds have outperformed if you look at just the last year, 2 years, 5 years, and even sometimes the 10 years, And again, historical performance is not indicative of future results, but it's to say you can't do it at all, and to take away that option from people that want it, when these funds are performing at par with, if not better than, traditional investments. That's just an attack on, that's an attack that's completely arbitrary. And I'm going to get really mad talking about this.
No, I mean, and you should be, right? Because that's like, I mean, obviously that's in bad faith, because the entire reason why the move, and this is getting into a little preview of our conversation on retirement funds.
Yes.
The entire reason why we moved from defined benefits to a defined contributions is because of this push by mostly more conservative folks, but also folks that are middle of the road, sort of moderates, that we should push folks to deal with retirement on their own individually, because we believe that the individual makes rational decisions about what is best for them, and that they're best left to their own individual decisions. That's a kind of core belief, right? Yeah. Amongst conservatives. And I'm not disagreeing or agreeing with that. I'm just saying that that's the foundation. And if that's your foundation, then all options ought to be open to 401k participants, right? Because I'm the individual, I'm a rational individual, and I should be able to make my choices. And to then exclude certain choices, what's your argument? Is your argument that those portfolios shouldn't be in the pool because folks might take those portfolios and that might be bad for them, and we want to protect those poor individuals from those bad choices that they're going to make? Well, then why are we moving in this direction at all?
Well, in the financial advisors and the 401k managers are beholden to fiduciary obligations already. You have to make a decision that is in the best interest of the participants of that plan and not in the best interest of oneself. So if you were picking mutual funds that were not in the best interest of those participants, or picking the ones that charge you the highest fees, and they have really poor performance, or it's not a well-diversified portfolio, or any one of a number of things, you're breaking the law. Like those rules are already in place. So this is just an attack. It's for no other reason. I couldn't find one. And it's likely to go through because it's a ruling from the Department of Labor that will regulate and make it much more difficult to build the types of portfolios that a lot of people want to have as a business owner, that they want to have for their business. So in terms of
that's just like a slap in the face of the free market, ideologues, right? Like all choices should be on the table, right?
Yes. And I don't know exactly what the outcome of that will be. I don't know how Biden getting elected will affect that. My like hot pie in the sky, like if I could have any policy I dream of, is like so much more pragmatic than yours. I just want the DOL to stop their ridiculous ruling.
And I'm like, the federal government should provide jobs for everyone.
Yeah.
But I think, I think the two, so to a certain extent, right? Like, you need to think about all of those. You need to think about all of these pieces in order to put together a package that, really puts money in the places that are going to do the best for everyone. And so it's moves that, and those are both moves at the federal government level, right? Those are both choices at the federal government level. Like one is like an administrative choice that the DOL is making or could make. The other one is a choice that Congress would have to make, but they're all, they're all federal government. They're all run by the federal government. They're all completely appropriate things to have a conversation about when you're talking about what do you hope for in the next administration, I think.
I feel like my bar has been set so low in terms of expectations.
Because why would that be, Katelyn?
Well, if you didn't know our political affiliation yet, now you definitely do. But I'll be a little bit real for a second, that watching Biden's acceptance speech, which was a week and a half ago, if you can believe it. To me, it feels like 6 months ago or 3 months ago.
Yeah.
I could not help but openly weep to just hear someone speak kindly and to bring an element of character that felt genuine and joyful, and to see the family just watching the fireworks happily up on the stage. I thought, like, it just that alone, it's in many ways that's enough for me. But I think once we can get the ball rolling, and we've got weeks ahead of us of continuing this nightmare, since our current president won't admit that he lost the election, then, once we're past that and things can really get going, I think we should have another episode like this where we talk about, now that the gates are all open and we can start really looking at this. There's a lot that can be done with investment tax, the federal investment tax credit, that could be leveraged to increase the production of and development of solar projects all around the country. We need to upgrade the grid. We need to, like the poles and the wires that you see outside when you get your electricity. Yeah, Einstein built those. How do you feel about that? They've been there for a long time, and like, we go over the same roads 100 times and we still haven't gotten a new pole since they put it up, unless a car crashes into it or a tree falls.
I think the thing that I am, the thing that I'm fearful of, right, going forward is folks being so tired, folks who feel like, who are supportive of Biden and are really happy that this went through, being so tired that sort of apathy sets in, and that folks are like, not going to push the administration in the way that they should. Because I agree with you, right? Like, I'll admit, like, there's a sigh of relief from me, but at the same time, like, I feel like what we're going to do to bring the 70 million folks that voted for Trump back over, or some of them back over, right, is to have, and this is something that Ezra Klein talks a lot about, and like, I'm a big fan of his. I listen to his podcast a lot. He actually did a podcast right after the election in which they basically just did off the cuff, like, just and I thought that was great. That's, I think that's important to just talk about these things. But I think, what government needs to do, what the federal government needs to do, is things that really make people's lives better. And I think this is appropriate conversation for the SustainaFi, right? Like, how do we get federal government to do things that make people's lives better so that we can have confidence in the federal government again? Because even on the left, like, even when you talk to people that are on the left, about the federal government, they're like, they're all about, federal, like, minimum wage and all these things. And then you're like, well, who's going to implement that? And it's the federal government. And then they're like, oh yeah, the federal government, like, they're terrible. What a huge bureaucracy.
And the ability of our federal government to deliver
to do things.
Yes.
And make people's lives better. And then that will result, if that can happen, then what will happen is more folks who voted for Trump, and many people voted for Trump because he was an outsider, he wasn't part of the federal government, right, swamp or whatever. They'll see, if they can see that the government is doing good things for them and helping them, then more folks will be like encouraging their elected officials, whether they're Republican or Democrat, to do more stuff.
Yeah.
I
read an article in the New York Times today that I thought was really interesting, because it was saying that, like, all the Democrats are like, why didn't we have this crazy blue wave we had anticipated? And on the right, they lost the national election, and they and a bunch of people came out and voted for them in up and down the ballot all around the country. And so, like, all these theories are being floated that the Democrats lost because of defund the police, and they lost because they didn't have the most well-organized campaigns, and they didn't have a strong message, and that Republicans were able to, like, reach people in a way that they didn't, that even I think surprised them. And this article was like, none of that is true. You don't have any data to back up any of those theories. Yeah. And then, and I really appreciated the one line he said, "It's the money, stupid." So like,
Yeah.
it's the economy, stupid, calling
Yeah.
back George Bush.
Yeah.
And so what he said was that the reason why Republicans did as well as they did was because they got the letter that we all got when we got our check from the government from Donald Trump saying, "Here's some money."
Yeah.
And that resonated with people that didn't have any. And so they weren't necessarily staring at C-SPAN or reading all these articles. They're going about their daily lives. So all they knew was that their government helped them.
Yeah.
And they didn't necessarily realize that it was the Democrats that had been pushing for that and arguing for it and doing everything that they needed to do to make sure they could get what they needed, and that they were pushing for more and didn't get it. So this article said, if you want people to vote for you, no matter what your political affiliation, no matter what your colors or your stripes, that supporting your constituents financially wins elections for you, because that's what they needed. And they were able to buy the things that they needed. People that have never had enough money to do things were getting the higher unemployment benefits. They were actually able to go get what their family needed. And so they voted Republican because that was the name on the bottom.
It came from them. It came from him.
Yeah.
No,
so
I think
that was
that's
really
true.
interesting.
Yeah, I think it's true. And I think the more that, and I think, and part of it, I think, is marketing, right? Like the idea that, like, you've heard this quote, and it was from a town hall meeting years ago. I don't even remember, but it was some, older person, saying, get your goddamn government hands off my Social Security. And it's like, Social Security is a government program. It is an entitlement program offered to you by the government, and there are a lot of programs that do a lot of things, but I feel like, they've become part of just the world, right, that we live in. And it's, folks just feel like they'll just be there. And I feel like I don't want the federal government to take away a lot of these programs and like be like, see, how terrible it is without us. Like, I don't, and I'm not, I'm really interested in this phenomenon now where, since Trump became part of the federal government, like the rhetoric amongst militia folks has gone from we need our guns to protect ourselves against the federal government to we need our guns to protect ourselves against Antifa, right? Like, so, to me, it's like, it's a flaw somewhere in, it's a flaw somewhere in how information is being, I come to a lot of things from an education perspective. And so when I see like folks, saying things that don't make sense or saying things that are anti-factual, I feel like there's a miscommunication somewhere. There's a miseducation somewhere. And how do you address that? How does the federal government address that? I mean, I think that's a huge challenge of the Biden administration, right? Like, how does the Biden administration get the word out that we're not here to destroy you, we're here to lift you up, America, and better, more importantly, make the other folks who voted for Trump believe it. And I think the way you do that is exactly what you said, not just by cutting checks, but like by putting programs in place that help people and make their lives better, and saying, this is a government program that you're benefiting from.
Yeah.
Done because we came together, because we have your interest in mind. And there's lots of things that you need to change in order for that to happen. Campaign finance being one of them, right? So that, if we change the corporations to people, right, that would be a huge one, right? But I don't know how, what I don't know is I don't know how you do that.
Well, there seems to be just a lot of people that seemingly just want to create chaos. That they
want to tear it all down.
Yes. And I see that some of the things I see on Twitter are from like people with millions of followers that are just believing and agreeing with everything that they say, it just stuns me, because I know it's wrong. I know that it's factually inaccurate, and it's a lie, and it's not misleading. It's not it's just a blatant lie. And it can't possibly be something that the person believes. They're just simply trying to create mayhem. And so in a world where no one knows what to believe, and everyone is doubting everything, to get the programs across that we need to, in an era of just such just the way people are approaching the pandemic, and people are dying of COVID and saying, I can't possibly be dying because it doesn't exist.
Yep.
And so to solve some of these problems with sustainable finance, to usher in programs that are going to help people, I think that you're right. We have to start with just a huge communication gap that exists in the United States right now. Otherwise, like how can you help someone that believes that you're trying to hurt them?
Yes,
anything that you say, they're not going to believe you.
And I don't know how you do that. I don't
either.
That's the thing that I struggle with in conversations with people that that say like there was huge fraud in this election. And it's like, I know that no matter what evidence I provide that wasn't the case, I don't know how I'm going to get them to hear me. It definitely isn't going to be by calling them stupid though. And like saying that they're, and saying that they're like, being angry at them for their misinformation. Right. So,
right.
And I'll be honest, like often that is my first inclination is like, why? Why do you believe the things you say?
I think we have to meet people where they are, and we have to build trust, and that takes time.
But it's so hard.
I know it is.
And it's
I
also
have a lot of conversations with, well, probably not, I wouldn't say a lot, but I have a few friends and colleagues that are just completely in disagreement with me on all of this. They believe a lot of these theories and the conspiracy theories, and I'm interacting with some of these people on a weekly basis, and I just keep having conversations with them, sometimes about stuff that is completely unrelated to any of those things. But when those things come up, I hear them and I politely rebut them and I provide evidence. And I think that it's going to have to be something that we're patient with, and it's going to come down to communication style. And I think kindness, which is, it's a word that's overused. But I think that if we just start trying to pass. Hi.
Say hi.
Hi.
Hi. How's it going?
Good.
Are you having fun?
Yeah.
You look more like your mom every day, I swear.
I only came to talk for a second because I would have to go poop.
All right, I'll be right in. Okay. He's been having a lot of trouble lately being scared, so.
That's okay. Happens to the best of us. I make my daughters go with me to the bathroom too.
No, I think you're absolutely right. But the struggle there, right, is that like, how can we ask people of color to like listen to the racism and be kind? Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, I know you're right. I think it's got to come from the professionals that are put in place to deal with it. Your job is not just to deliver a program. Your job is to sit down and meet with the people that are going to be on the receiving end with it and build a relationship with them. And that's going to take a lot. Like, you want to talk about government programs and a lot of people needing to be employed. That's what we're going to have to do. That we're not shoving somebody down your throat. This is not going to bankrupt the nation. Like, I mean, all the pushback isn't that we've talked about earlier. Is the logical pushback. Right. It's never going to be those things. It's going to be, this is funded by whomever, and it's meant to disrupt everything. And so I think that we have to just, I do think it's possible. And I think it's possible with patience and with human connection.
Yes.
And I think that the pandemic is in and of itself the worst thing ever. And that it's also made recovering from that very thing impossible because we can't see each other. So now we're all just, behind our screens and on our phones, like feeding into it.
Yelling at each other.
So I think that this is probably a good place to end, Tom, that we think that the sustainable financial way to move forward in our country is to bring together an element of kindness into the work that people are going to do. That I think that that's going to be, it's maybe less sustainable finance and more just being a good person, but I think that that's what it'll take.
Well, it's exactly sustainable. It is sustainable finance, right? Because it's putting human needs first. No matter what your political stripe is, it's putting human needs first.
That's awesome. What a great place to end, because that's where we started this whole.
Right.
See, we can do well even when Megan's not here.
Well, the only person that can judge that is Meg, so she'll have to watch.
Yes, we'll have to figure out what her thoughts are. All right, Tom, thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem.
And good luck with helping your son in the bathroom.
All right. Take
And
care.
we'll see you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.